June 13, 1944, 9 a.m. The 88mm gun roared, and the first British Cromwell tank exploded in a fountain of flame and twisted metal. Before the crew of the second tank could even traverse their turret, another armor-piercing round slammed through their hull. Then another. In less than 60 seconds, 4 British tanks were burning wrecks. The crews of the remaining vehicles along Route Nationale 175 scrambled in panic, desperately trying to start engines, load guns, do anything to fight back against the massive German Tiger tank that had appeared from nowhere. But SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann wasn't finished. His Tiger rolled forward, its tracks grinding over the Norman cobblestones, its guns swiveling with mechanical precision to acquire the next target. What happened in the next 15 minutes would become one of the most devastating armored ambushes in military history, a single tank commander destroying more than a dozen enemy vehicles before British soldiers even understood what was attacking them. The peaceful French town of Villers-Bocage was about to become the scene of a massacre. This is the story of that morning, a story of tactical brilliance, technological superiority, and the brutal efficiency of warfare when skill and surprise converge. It's a story that military academies still study today, and one that historians continue to debate. How did one tank achieve so much destruction so quickly? And was Michael Wittmann really the Superman that German propaganda claimed, or was the legend built on exaggeration and myth? Chapter 1: The Tiger and its Master. The Tiger I heavy tank represented the pinnacle of German armored design in 1944. Weighing 56 tons and mounting the fearsome 88mm KWK-36 gun, it was arguably the most powerful tank in the world. Its frontal armor, 100mm thick, could shrug off hits from most Allied anti-tank weapons. The 88mm gun could penetrate any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Distances at which Allied tanks couldn't effectively return fire. But the Tiger was also temperamental. Its complex overlapping wheel system collected mud and debris, freezing solid in Russian winters. Its Maybach engine was powerful but thirsty, giving the tank limited operational range. Mechanical breakdowns were common, and the Tiger required constant maintenance. Most of the German armored battalion's vehicles were the 56-ton Tiger I heavy tank, mounting a high-velocity 88mm cannon that was superior to the 75mm and 17-pounder, 76mm, guns of the new British Cromwell and Sherman Firefly tanks in the field. The Tiger was not a tank for amateurs. It required a highly trained crew and a commander who understood both its strengths and limitations. SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann was exactly that kind of commander. Born in 1914 in a small Bavarian village, Wittmann had joined the SS in 1937 at age 23. By June 1944, Michael Wittmann was already one of the most famous officers in the Waffen-SS and its greatest panzer ace. He had joined the Leibstandard Division in 1937. As a sergeant he commanded an armored car in Poland and France, and he went on to earn the Iron Cross Second Class in Greece. Wittmann was wounded twice and won the Iron Cross First Class in Russia in 1941, before being sent to an SS officers' school and commissioned second lieutenant in December 1942. By June 1944, Wittmann had already earned the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. His kill tally ran to an astronomical 119 tanks, almost all of which were claimed during a particularly successful year serving with the Leibstandard's Tiger Company on the Eastern Front. He had survived the brutal battles of the Eastern Front, where German and Soviet armor clashed in massive engagements across the endless plains. He knew how to use terrain, how to position his tank for maximum advantage, and how to remain calm under fire. Wittmann was not particularly tall or physically imposing. His crew remembered him as calm, methodical, and professional, not the stereotypical warrior. But inside a Tiger tank, with his veteran crew around him, Wittmann transformed into something formidable. Chapter 2: The Strategic Situation. To understand what happened at Villers-Bocage, we must first understand why British tanks were there at all. The Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, had succeeded in establishing a beachhead, but the campaign was not proceeding according to plan. The city of Caen, A D-Day objective that British planners had expected to capture on the first day, remained firmly in German hands a week later. German forces, particularly the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend and Panzerlehr Division, had established strong defensive positions around the city. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding Allied ground forces, needed to break this stalemate. His planners identified an opportunity. American forces pushing inland from Omaha Beach had forced the Germans to pull back, creating a gap between the 352nd Infantry Division and Panzerlehr Division. If British forces could exploit this gap quickly, they might be able to outflank the German defenses around Caen. The mission fell to the 7th Armored Division, the famous Desert Rats, who had fought with distinction in North Africa. On the afternoon of June 12, the division's 22nd Armored Brigade began its advance, led by the 4th County of London Yeomanry, 4th CLY. Their objective was to seize Villers-Bocage and the commanding ground at Point 213, a ridge northeast of the town, then push toward Caen from the southwest. The advance went remarkably well. By June 1944, Montgomery then planned to hold Caen and the high ground immediately to its south. The British column moved through the night without encountering serious resistance, covering more than 30 kilometers. By dawn on June 13, the lead elements had reached Villers-Bocage. What the British didn't know was that elements of SS Heavy Panzer Battalion 101, including Wittmann's company, had just arrived in the area the previous evening. Chapter 3: The morning of June 13. SS Heavy Panzer Battalion 101 had been stationed in Belgium when the invasion began, and Hitler had personally ordered them to Normandy. The journey south had been hazardous. Allied air superiority meant traveling by day was suicidal, so the Tigers moved at night, hiding during daylight hours. Several tanks broke down en route. Mechanical problems plagued the complex beasts even without enemy action. By the evening of June 12, only a handful of Tigers from the battalion had reached the Villers-Bocage area. In June of 1944, Wittmann was in command of a company of tanks of the 101st Heavy Tank Battalion of the 1st SS Panzer Division. Already highly experienced and decorated, Michael Wittmann was credited with over 100 tank kills before he arrived in Normandy, most on the Eastern Front. Wittmann's second company had only 5 operational Tigers. They took up positions in a small wood south of the hamlet of Montbrock, about 2 kilometers northeast of Villers-Bocage, near the critical Point 213. On the morning of June 13, at 6 a.m., Wittmann, with Bobby Wall behind the 88mm main gun, set out along the wooded area to avoid being spotted via an air patrol. 1:50 m from Hill 213, Wittmann met an army sergeant who told of a convoy heading their way. What Wittmann saw must have shocked even his experienced eyes. A massive British armored column, tanks, half-tracks, transport vehicles, stretched along the road toward Villers-Bocage. The lead elements had already reached Point 213 and stopped. Crews were dismounting, starting to brew tea, relaxing after their night march. Wittmann faced a critical decision. German doctrine called for him to report contact and wait for reinforcement. But if he waited, the British would dig in and the opportunity would be lost. The British had not yet spotted his position. If he attacked immediately, he might catch them completely by surprise. Wittmann was surprised by the British advance through Villers-Bocage. "I had no time to assemble my company. Instead, I had to act quickly, as I had to assume that the enemy had already spotted me and would destroy me where I stood. I set off with 1 tank and passed the order to the others not to retreat a single step but to hold their ground. He would attack alone." Chapter 4: The ambush begins. At approximately 9 a.m., Wittmann's Tiger emerged from the tree line onto Route Nationale 175. The tank's appearance was sudden and shocking. One moment the road was empty, the next, a massive German heavy tank sat directly among the British column. The Tiger emerged from cover onto Route Nationale 175 and knocked out a Cromwell, the rearmost tank at Point 213. The 88mm gun spoke with its characteristic sharp crack, and the Cromwell exploded. Before the stunned British crews could react, Wittmann's gun spoke again. And again. In rapid succession, Wittmann's gunner, SS Rottenführer Bobby Wall, destroyed the British tanks on point 213. The German training and the Tiger's superior firepower made it devastatingly one-sided. British tankers scrambled to man their vehicles, but Wittmann was already moving, his Tiger rolling down the road toward Villers-Bocage proper. Sergeant O'Connor, 1st Platoon, a company, 1st Rifle Brigade, was traveling towards point 213 in a half-track and broke radio silence to give the only warning the British force received. "For Christ's sake, get a move on! There's a Tiger running alongside us 50 yards away." But the warning came too late. Wittmann drove parallel to the British column, methodically destroying vehicles as he passed. The Rifle Brigade troops attempted to reply with PIT anti-tank weapons and a 6-pounder anti-tank gun. As the Tiger drew closer, panic set in and the riflemen looked for cover. The brigade vehicles were set on fire by machine guns and high-explosive shells, but few casualties were suffered. The Tiger's armor proved impervious to the light anti-tank weapons the British infantry carried. PIT rounds bounced harmlessly off the thick steel. The 6-pounder anti-tank guns, effective against lighter German tanks, couldn't penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at this range. And Wittmann gave them no time to set up proper ambush positions. He kept moving, kept firing, never presenting a stationary target. Within minutes, the road behind Wittmann's Tiger looked like a junkyard. Half-tracks burned, their fuel tanks erupting in columns of black smoke. Universal carriers lay wrecked along the roadside. British infantry scattered into the fields and buildings, seeking any cover from the monstrous tank grinding past them. Chapter 5. Into the town. Wittmann didn't stop at the edge of Villers-Bocage. He drove directly into the town itself, his Tiger's tracks clattering on the cobblestone streets. At the east end of Villers-Bocage, Wittmann engaged and knocked out 3 M3 Stuart light tanks of the 4th CLY Reconnaissance Troop. The small American-made light tanks stood no chance against the Tiger. The 88mm gun destroyed all 3 in quick succession, their thin armor offering no protection. Now Wittmann was in the heart of the town, among the regimental headquarters tanks of the 4th CLY. These were command vehicles, containing the senior officers coordinating the entire British advance. Their destruction would decapitate the British force. In the town, the tanks of the 4th CLY regimental headquarters tried to escape, but their reverse speed was painfully slow. One tank fired 2 shots before being destroyed by the Tiger. 2 tanks reversed off the road into gardens. One of those tanks was commanded by Captain Pat Dias. As Wittmann's Tiger approached, Dias managed to reverse his Cromwell into a garden behind a barn, hiding from the Germans' direct view. Wittmann's Tiger rolled past without spotting him, a remarkable piece of luck that would soon prove important. The 4th CLY adjutant, Captain Pat Dias, parked behind a barn. The Tiger drove past a wrecked Stuart towards the center of town, knocking out another tank and missing Dias. The sound of the Tiger's gun echoed through the narrow streets. Civilians who had emerged to welcome the British liberators now fled back into their homes, terrified by the violence erupting around them. British soldiers scattered, looking for anywhere to hide from the seemingly invincible German tank. At the eastern edge of town, Wittmann encountered a Sherman Firefly, the one British tank that could threaten a Tiger. The Firefly mounted a 17-pounder, 76mm, gun, powerful enough to penetrate Tiger armor if it could get a clean shot. A brief duel ensued, but Wittmann withdrew before the Firefly could score a hit. Chapter 6. The Tiger Stops. Wittmann had now penetrated deep into Villers-Bocage, leaving a trail of burning British vehicles behind him. But his luck was about to change. Wittmann drove east to the outskirts of Villers-Bocage, and was disabled by a 6-pounder anti-tank gun at the Tilly-sur-Seulles Road junction. Wittmann wrote that his tank was disabled by an anti-tank gun in the town center. The exact details of how Wittmann's Tiger was stopped remain disputed. What's clear is that a 6-pounder anti-tank gun, manned by British soldiers of the Rifle Brigade, managed to score a hit that damaged the Tiger's tracks or running gear. The massive tank ground to a halt, immobilized in the streets of Villers-Bocage. For Wittmann and his crew, this was a desperate moment. Their tank was disabled deep in enemy-held territory, surrounded by hostile forces. British infantry would soon converge on their position. German doctrine called for crew to abandon an immobilized tank and attempt to escape on foot. But the Tiger's guns still worked. For approximately 20 minutes, Wittmann and his crew held their position. The Tiger couldn't move, but it could still fight. Unable to move, but still in a strong position, Wittmann spent 20 minutes using his Tiger's machine guns and 88 to shoot at anything that looked like a target. The British withdrew and Wittmann and his crew escaped to the north. Meanwhile, Captain Dias, who had hidden his Cromwell behind the barn, saw an opportunity. He had been bypassed by Wittmann's initial rampage, and now found himself behind the German tank. The Tiger's rear armor was thinner than its frontal protection. If Dias could get a clear shot at the Tiger's back, he might be able to destroy it. Wittmann's withdrawal brought him close to Dias, who, having been bypassed, had been stalking the Tiger to fire at its thinner rear armor. The Cromwell shells had no effect and Wittmann destroyed the British tank. Dias fired at the Tiger's rear, but even the thinner back armor proved resistant to his Cromwell's 75mm gun. The shot struck but failed to penetrate. Wittmann, alerted to the threat behind him, traversed his turret and destroyed Dias's tank. The British captain escaped the burning Cromwell and fled on foot, dodging German machine gun fire in the streets. Eventually, the British pulled back enough for Wittmann and his crew to abandon their damaged Tiger and escape northward on foot. They would walk several kilometers back to German lines, but they had survived. Chapter 7: The Butcher's Bill. When the shooting stopped and the smoke cleared, the devastation was stunning. In less than 15 minutes, 13 to 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns and 13 to 15 transport vehicles had been destroyed by the 2nd Company, 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, many by Wittmann. The exact numbers remain debated. While in command of a Tiger I tank, Wittmann destroyed up to 14 tanks, 15 personnel carriers and 2 anti-tank guns within 15 minutes before the loss of his own tank. Some accounts credit him with more, others suggest the total should be lower. What's undeniable is that a single Tiger tank, commanded by one man, had devastated an entire British armored column in a remarkably short time. The British force on Point 213, cut off from the rest of their column by Wittmann's rampage, surrendered at midday. The surviving troops on Point 213 surrendered at 1300 hours. For the 4th CLY, the morning had been catastrophic. They had advanced confidently through the night, expecting limited German opposition, and had been caught completely by surprise. Their losses in tanks and vehicles were severe, but perhaps more damaging was the psychological impact. The Desert Rats, victorious veterans of North Africa, had been mauled by a single enemy tank. Chapter 8: The German Counterattack. But Wittmann's rampage was only the beginning of the Battle of Villers-Bocage. After escaping his disabled Tiger, Wittmann walked more than 7 kilometers back to German lines. Wittmann now walked more than 7 kilometers, 4.3 miles, to the headquarters of the Panzer-Lehr Division. At these headquarters, he briefed the divisional operations officer on the action in Villers-Bocage. The German commanders immediately recognized the opportunity. If the British could be driven from Villers-Bocage, the dangerous penetration into German lines would be sealed. He was given command of a company of 15 Panzer IVs and ordered to clear the town of all British troops. By early afternoon, Wittmann returned to Villers-Bocage, this time commanding a mixed force of Panzer IVs from Panzer-Lehr Division and additional Tigers from the 1st Company of his battalion that had arrived during the morning. The battle for the town itself became a close-quarters urban fight. British infantry had reinforced Villers-Bocage during the morning and were now prepared for German armor. The 1st Company Tigers led the attack into the main street of the town. In the meantime, a camped group of infantry from the Panzer-Lehr Division joined the attack. British infantry had now reinforced the town and, at the mercy of this strengthened force, the German tanks were met by a hail of PIT bazooka rounds. Anti-tank grenades, which the British dropped from upper stories, were to account for at least one of the 4 Tigers and 1 Panzer IV destroyed in the battle. The urban environment favored the defenders. British infantry, fighting from buildings and upper floors, could drop grenades onto the thinner top armor of German tanks. P.I.E. rounds, ineffective against frontal Tiger armor in the open, could damage tracks and disable tanks in the confined streets. He took 2 Tigers in the Panzer IV and advanced west along the main street. However, he ran straight into the British ambush. His own tank was hit on the left by the 6-pounder, and the second Tiger was knocked out by the Firefly. The Panzer IV survived the initial ambush, but one of the Cromwells then drove out behind it and knocked it out. The Germans had lost all 3 tanks in a few moments, although Wittmann and his crew were able to escape, taking advantage of a lack of British infantry. The afternoon fighting cost the Germans heavily. Several Tigers were destroyed or disabled, irreplaceable losses of Germany's most powerful tanks. The British, while forced to withdraw from Villers-Bocage itself, had demonstrated that Tigers were not invincible when fighting in urban terrain against determined infantry. By late afternoon, the British pulled back from Villers-Bocage to more defensible positions to the west of town. The Germans had recaptured the town, but at considerable cost. Casualties were heavy on both sides, with 217 British dead and the loss of more than 40 tanks and armored vehicles. A squadron, County of London Yeomanry, lost all 15 of its Cromwells, Fireflies, and Stuarts. As many as 15 German tanks, including 6 irreplaceable Tigers, were destroyed. Chapter 9: Aftermath and Analysis. The Battle of Villers-Bocage had profound consequences for both sides. For the British, it was a painful setback. The bold flanking maneuver that might have outflanked German defenses around Caen had been stopped. British forces hammered away at Caen for 2 months before capturing the city, and Villers-Bocage remained in German hands until the first week of August. The delay gave the Germans time to reinforce their positions, prolonging the Battle of Normandy and the grinding attritional warfare that characterized the campaign. For the Germans, the battle demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of their heavy tanks. Wittmann's morning rampage showed what a Tiger could accomplish in the hands of a skilled commander with tactical surprise. But the afternoon fighting revealed the Tiger's vulnerabilities. In close terrain, against determined infantry with anti-tank weapons, even the mighty Tiger could be destroyed. For Wittmann personally, the battle made him famous throughout Germany. For his actions during the battle, Wittmann was promoted to SS Hauptsturmführer, and awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves and swords. The German propaganda machine swiftly credited Wittmann, by then a household name in Germany, with all the British tanks destroyed at Villers-Bocage. But Wittmann's fame would be short-lived. He would die in combat less than 2 months later, on August 8, 1944, during Operation Totalize. Lieutenant Wittmann was decorated for his rampage at the French village but died in combat on August 8, 1944. He was 30 years old. His Tiger was likely destroyed by a Canadian Sherman Firefly, though the exact circumstances of his death remain disputed. Chapter 10: The Legend and the Reality. In the decades since the battle, historians have debated exactly what happened at Villers-Bocage and how much credit Wittmann personally deserves. In 2013, British historian John Buckley criticized the accounts which many historians continue to provide of the fighting around Villers-Bocage. Buckley argued that by wrongly attributing the entire German success to Wittmann, many historians through to today continue to repackage unquestioningly Nazi propaganda. The truth is complex. Wittmann's initial rampage through the British column was undeniably devastating and largely his personal achievement. His crew, Bobby Wall on the gun, and the other experienced tankers who had served with him through the Russian campaigns, deserves credit for the precision shooting that destroyed so many British vehicles so quickly. However, the total British losses at Villers-Bocage came from the entire day's fighting, not just Wittmann's morning attack. Other Tigers from his company engaged British forces on Point 213. The afternoon battle in the town involved multiple German tanks and infantry units. The German propaganda machine, recognizing Wittmann's public relations value, attributed all German successes at Villers-Bocage to him personally. The British Army lost 22 Cromwell and Stuart tanks at the Battle of Villers-Bocage, but a British counter-attack later in the day ended with the destruction of 5 Tiger I tanks, and up to 8 Panzer IV tanks. This broader picture shows a costly engagement for both sides, not the one-sided German victory that propaganda suggested. Chapter 11: Tactical Lessons. The Battle of Villers-Bocage offers numerous tactical lessons that remain relevant for understanding armored warfare. The value of initiative. Wittmann's decision to attack immediately, rather than waiting for support, proved decisive. Had he delayed, the British would have consolidated their position and the element of surprise would have been lost. Bold action at the critical moment can multiply force effectiveness. The danger of complacency. The British column, having advanced without opposition through the night, let down their guard. Crews dismounted, relaxed, and failed to maintain proper security. In combat, vigilance must be constant. The enemy attacks when you're least prepared. Technical superiority has limits. The Tiger was technically superior to any British tank at Villers-Bocage. Its gun could destroy British tanks at ranges where they couldn't effectively fight back. Its armor was proof against most British weapons. Yet technical superiority alone didn't guarantee victory. Several Tigers were destroyed in the afternoon fighting when caught in unfavorable tactical situations. Urban fighting neutralizes armor advantages. The afternoon battle showed how urban terrain changes the calculus of tank combat. In the confined streets of Villers-Bocage, where ranges were short and infantry could attack from buildings, the Tiger's advantages in firepower and armor mattered less. Top and side armor, thinner than frontal protection, became vulnerable to infantry weapons. Intelligence failures are costly. The British had little warning that German heavy tanks were in the area. Better reconnaissance might have revealed the German presence. The Germans, conversely, were surprised by the British advance and had to react hastily. Both sides paid for incomplete intelligence. Crew quality matters. Wittmann's crew had fought together for months, developing the teamwork and communication that made them devastatingly effective. Training and experience magnified the Tiger's technical capabilities. The same tank, with a less experienced crew, might have achieved far less. Chapter 12: The Broader Context. Understanding Villers-Bocage requires placing it in the broader context of the Normandy campaign and the war's final year. By June 1944, Germany was clearly losing the war. The Eastern Front had collapsed following the massive Soviet summer offensive of 1943. Allied bombing was destroying German cities and industry. The Italian front had bogged down but tied down German divisions. The Normandy invasion opened a third major front that Germany lacked the resources to properly defend. In this strategic context, tactical victories like Villers-Bocage, however impressive, couldn't change the war's trajectory. The German forces in Normandy were doomed by mathematics. The Allies could replace losses. The Germans could not. Every Tiger destroyed was irreplaceable. The Allies produced new tanks by the thousands. Wittmann's rampage bought time. A few more weeks before Villers-Bocage fell, a delay in the British capture of Cannes. But time was something Germany no longer had. The industrial might of the United States and the vast manpower of the Soviet Union were grinding down German resistance on all fronts. The Tiger itself symbolized Germany's predicament. It was arguably the world's best tank in one-on-one combat. But Germany couldn't build enough of them. From 1942 to 1945, Germany produced approximately 1,350 Tigers and 500 Tiger IIs, impressive tanks, but a tiny fraction of the tens of thousands of T-34s, Shermans, and Cromwells the Allies fielded. There is no doubting Wittmann's courage in taking on the British column at Villers-Bocage, and in his venturing alone into the town in his lone Tiger. However, one could also suggest that his action was more than a little foolhardy, resulting in a short-term benefit that effectively nullified any hope of a more long-term strategic advantage for the German forces. Chapter 13: The Myth and the Man. Michael Wittmann has become one of World War II's most recognizable figures, particularly among military history enthusiasts and armor warfare students. His story embodies certain romantic notions: the skilled warrior, outnumbered but triumphant through superior skill and courage, achieving the impossible against overwhelming odds. but the romantic image obscures a more complex reality. Wittmann was fighting for Nazi Germany, a regime guilty of unprecedented atrocities. The SS organization he served was deeply implicated in war crimes. While Wittmann's personal unit appears not to have been directly involved in atrocities, the distinction between fighting SS units and those committing genocide was never as clear as post-war German veterans claimed. The celebration of Wittmann's tactical skill need not imply approval of the cause he served. Military historians can acknowledge his effectiveness as a tank commander while condemning the regime he fought for. The two positions are not contradictory. It's also worth noting that Wittmann's fame owes much to propaganda and circumstance. Other tank commanders, on all sides, achieved comparable or greater success with less recognition. Soviet tanker Dmitry Lavrenenko was credited with 52 tank kills before his death in 1941. American tank ace Lafayette Poole destroyed multiple German tanks in France. These men's stories are less well known, partly because their governments didn't publicize them as effectively. Much of the subsequent confusion about the numbers of claimed tank kills may well have stemmed from a radio broadcast given by Wittmann shortly after the event, where he had claimed the destruction of 21 armored vehicles, Kampfwagen, as opposed to 21 tanks, Panzers. This linguistic distinction between armored vehicles and tanks illustrates how legends grow from small exaggerations. Wittmann's claim wasn't necessarily dishonest. It reflected the chaos and confusion of combat, where precise accounting is impossible. Epilogue: Lessons for today. 75 years after Villers-Bocage, what lessons does this small, brutal engagement offer? First, it reminds us that battles are won by soldiers, not just weapons. The Tiger was a formidable machine, but it required Wittmann's skill and his crew's training to be effective. Modern militaries invest heavily in training and crew cohesion for good reason. The human element remains decisive. Second, it illustrates the persistent tension between quality and quantity in military equipment. Germany pursued technical excellence, building sophisticated weapons like the Tiger in limited numbers. The Allies accepted, good enough, tanks they could mass produce. The Allies' approach proved strategically superior, but it meant accepting higher casualties in individual engagements. This tension persists today in debates about military procurement. Third, it demonstrates the fog of war and the difficulty of establishing historical truth. We still don't know exactly how many vehicles Wittmann personally destroyed. Conflicting accounts, propaganda, and the chaos of combat leave many questions unanswered. Historians must work with incomplete, contradictory evidence, a reminder that certainty about historical events is often elusive. Finally, Villers-Bocage reminds us that tactical victories don't guarantee strategic success. Wittmann achieved a remarkable tactical triumph that morning in June 1944. The battle has been studied at military academies worldwide as a textbook example of how a single tank crew can multiply their effectiveness through surprise, initiative, and skill. Yet Germany still lost the war. The delay at Villers-Bocage bought Germany a few more weeks of resistance in Normandy, weeks purchased with irreplaceable tanks and veteran crews. By August, Allied forces had broken out of the Normandy hedgerows and were racing across France. By May 1945, Germany had surrendered unconditionally. Wars are not won by individual acts of heroism or tactical brilliance, however impressive. They are won by nations that can mobilize industrial production, maintain supply lines, replace losses, and sustain their populations will to fight over years of sacrifice. Germany could do none of these things by 1944. Michael Wittmann's 15 minutes of fury on a Norman country road demonstrated what one skilled soldier could achieve. But it also demonstrated the limits of individual achievement in an industrial total war. The Tiger could destroy a dozen British tanks. It couldn't stop a dozen Allied divisions. That, perhaps, is the final lesson of Villers-Bocage. In modern warfare, tactical excellence is necessary but not sufficient. Victory requires strategy, logistics, industrial capacity, and ultimately, a just cause that can sustain a nation through the terrible demands of total war. The morning of June 13, 1944, lasted 15 minutes for the British crews caught in Wittmann's ambush, 15 minutes of terror and confusion as a seemingly invincible German tank destroyed vehicle after vehicle. For historians, those 15 minutes have generated decades of debate about what exactly happened and how much credit Wittmann deserves. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, please subscribe and like it, and join our community of history lovers. We want to hear your voice. Leave a comment on the video, tell us where you come from, or share any family history related to the war. You are not just a spectator, you are helping us spread the truth about the heroism of the war years. We read every comment, and they really inspire us to work. See you next time.